So we're not a funding foundation, we're a small charity which exists to support people who are trying to make change. And that's everything from like individual local campaigners to big national sort of charities that have big campaigning teams. And we do quite a lot of stuff, but mainly, in a nutshell, what we're trying to do is make sure that people and organisations want to campaign, they feel confident doing it, they know they can do it. That there's nothing in the kind of outside world which is putting unreasonable restrictions on their campaigning. And we do sort of capacity building and training and coaching and stuff like that as well. Just very lovely say. So what I've done is I've put together, I know that some of you are charities, some of you are not charities, so I'm going to try and be quite clear as I go through what applies very specifically to charities, but a lot of the stuff that does apply to charities is actually just quite good advice for anybody who's thinking about doing some campaigning. So, can you campaign? The answer is yes. There's no, I can say 100 different ways, but you can absolutely campaign. You can do political campaigning, you can do political activity. And this is where we kind of run into a bit of a problem in this country, because in this country we don't really distinguish between political and party political. And if you read newspaper, if you read a comment from some backbench MP, you would be forgiven for thinking that there is such a thing as a charity being too political. That is not a thing. A charity can be party political. In fact, charities are absolutely not allowed to be party political, but they can be political. So, to the next slide. So let's talk about politics. You can see why my timing would have worked. So talking about politics makes people feel different things. It makes them feel passionate. It makes them feel a bit awkward. Some people have been brought up in households where you don't really talk about politics. Some people don't feel it's appropriate to talk about it in the workplace. Other people feel like it's the stuff of life. So there's lots of different attitudes to politics, which you do have to kind of be aware that not everyone's in the same place as you. But I particularly want to talk about political versus party political. So this is clearly political. The planet's burning and we need to do something about it. And then this is also clearly political. Black lives obviously matter, and there's a huge number of political questions which are attached to statements like that. But this is also political. Why can't I get a bus to the place I want to get to? Why do I feel I don't want to feel unsafe going home on my own at night? Those are all political conversations. Why can't my kid get the support they need in school? Why are too many children turning up in the morning hungry? Political. Those are political questions, they're political conversations. I want to complain to my landlord about the state of my flat, but I'm worried about being evicted. Why can't my kids live anywhere near where they grew up? Those are all political conversations. And I'm sorry if I sort of teaching you to suck eggs a bit, but I think it's really important to say these things out loud. Party politics is not politics. Or party politics is part of politics. This is party political. Helping a party get elected, helping a candidate get elected, and that is something that a charity absolutely cannot do. If you're not a charity, I'm not going to just tell you blanket, you can totally do that. You're going to need to check the rules for the kind of organisation or group that you are. And it might be that even if you're legally allowed to do this very openly, depending on what it is you're trying to achieve, you might want to, just present a slightly more balanced set of activities to the world. It just kind of depends who you're trying to get on board. But if you're a charity, this is definitely a no-go. So, this is what the Charity Commission says. This is their actual own words. Campaigning and political activity can be legitimate and valuable activities for charities to undertake. Valuable. Not just you can do it, but sometimes you should do it. And then the next one this is specifically as well from their guidance, called CC9. And if you're a charity, it's worth having a look at this. There'll be a link on the Miro board that Natasha's circulating. Because if you're a charity, you can be politically active, or you can get involved in campaigning and political activity, which furthers or supports your purposes, unless you're specifically not allowed to by your own documents. Not many charities have that in their documents, but again, it's worth checking. So as long as you know what it is you're trying to achieve, what your mission says you're trying to do, and if you conclude that from that part of what you should do is campaigning, then you can absolutely There are some important conditions, and you know, this is a bit of detail, but it's worth outlining. And again, I will say which ones of these apply very specifically to charity. So if you're a charity, it can't be the only thing you ever do. You can't be set up to only politically campaign. But if there's something that's really important and you feel like you've got to do it to achieve your mission, for a short period of time, it can be the only thing that you do. That's like unpacked a bit more in that CC9 guidance document. All of these apply to charities, but this is just good advice for anybody. Make sure that any involvement with political parties is balanced. That doesn't necessarily mean equal. If all of your local representatives are from one political party, then of course most of the people you're going to be engaging with are going to be from one political party. But sometimes it's kind of about perception. So, you know, if you're organising an event and you've got a mix of candidates locally, you know, don't just invite one party. That said, if you are an organisation and the views of a particular candidate or politician fundamentally clash with the values of your organisation, so if you are a racial justice organisation, you are not expected to invite some sort of extremist to your events. But you know, the mainstream parties, you know, make sure that you're keeping people kind of in the circle really, because you never know what's going to happen in politics. This one applies very specifically to charities. Don't give support or funding to a political party or candidate. Just don't give your money out like that. But of course you engage with them. Of course you speak to them. Of course you may well spend time or resource setting up opportunities to talk to them and stuff like that. But you don't give them donations, and you don't sort of vocalise your support or encourage people to vote for them if you are a charity. Final two, again, are things that charities really should do, but are good advice for everyone. Don't let your organisation be used as a vehicle for one individual's views. Your organisation is there to achieve something collectively, and that has to be expressed by anyone who is brought in to speak on your behalf. It doesn't mean that, you know, the views of staff or trustees or stakeholders might not very closely align with your organisations, but just be very careful, because it can happen very easily. You know, if someone's very charismatic and very passionate, they can sort of maybe dominate a conversation or dominate how you express yourselves as an organisation. So remember, it's generally good advice, but if you're a charity, you have to make sure it doesn't happen. And also, you've really got to weigh up the benefits and the costs and the risks of doing some campaigning. Will it be worth the resource and time and effort that you spend on it ultimately? That doesn't mean that you have to be able to show you can guarantee you're going to win, because sometimes campaigning is a journey. And even if you don't get to the end point of what you're doing, you are engaging people and moving them on and starting a conversation locally and making sure that issues aren't forgotten. So there's benefits in the journey of campaigning as much as winning the campaign sometimes. Oh, excuse me, I'm running out of breath. Next slide. But what can you do just to make sure that you feel confident about getting involved in a campaign as an organisation or starting one? So here's just a few tips about getting your ducks in a row. So I would suggest that you sit down individually or collectively and just try to answer these questions. So why this issue and why now? Why is it important that you get involved in this right now? Because you do need to be able to answer that quite clearly as you start to engage people in it. Another really important question is why you? Why should you be doing this as opposed to anyone else? The answer might be because no one else is doing it. But, you know, it raises some important issues about, are we going to lead this? Are we going to support other people to do it? And in which case, you know, are we in a position to support other people in that way? But be able to answer why you should do it. This sounds really basic, but actually it can be. A lot of people can talk around and around an issue and think that they've all agreed, but actually they haven't. So try and get it kind of set down. What are we trying to achieve here? And if you're a charity, just make sure that any activity you're thinking about is within the Charity Commission guidance. Do think about the risks of doing something. Of course, think about the risks of doing something, but think about the risks of not doing it. If we don't stand up and do something about this, is anyone else? And what damage might continue to be done if we stay silent? once you've sort of answered some of these questions, or as much as you can, these questions for yourselves, that's the point where you start to share your thinking with critical friends, and ask for help, because no one's born being able to sort of like do a campaign perfectly. There's no such thing as a perfect campaign. But yeah, find some critical friends. So that might be your sort of trustees, or a panel that you've sort of got, a steering group. It might be people in other organisations that you partner up with. Could be some local elected politicians. Run the stuff past them and see what they think, see what their response is. But that's a good point to get to before you start to widen out the conversation. I'm not suggesting this stuff kind of forms itself in a darkened room. Obviously, all of this comes out of conversations that you'll be having. But as you start to think about it as, what are we going to do? And I just want to leave you just with a few things that's really important to remember. Be confident you've got the right to campaign, because you do. We all do. And if your organisational purpose and your analysis of what's going on, in your world at the time, might actually lead you to conclude that you have more than a right to campaign. You've got a duty to campaign on something. Do make sure, if you have trustees or a steering group or some key stakeholders, that you speak to them at the right point. You know them best, so your judgment on when the right time to do that is. It might be from day one, or it might be further down the line. But bring them along, because the last thing you need is someone slamming on the brakes just as you're about to really go for it. But not necessarily because they don't agree with you, but because they can't see the evidence that you've thought some of this stuff through. Think about how people need to be involved and what they're going to need to be involved. Whether you can help provide it, or whether you're going to need some partners to help provide it. But try and think about that stuff as early as you can. And also, it's really important to explain to your supporters, maybe whether that's volunteers or donors or people who are going to be active with you, why campaigning is an important part of what you do. In this country, we do have a slightly weirdly Victorian idea of charity, that it's, like you said, keeping people in one piece for, just till the next day and the next day. And that is important work, don't get me wrong. But we kind of think that's, a lot of people think that's where charities should stop. So explain to your supporters why this issue is important now and why you are doing it. And finally, it's really important to recognise that no matter how big or small you think your voice is, it's really important. Our democracy does not work if all we do is turn up and vote once every 2 to 4 years. Our democracy works because life is about a churning conversation about what we need our world to be like. We're not all ever going to agree on everything, and that's kind of the entire point. So I just want to leave you with a quote from someone who's very personally important to me, Doctor, who is amazed one day when he actually meets someone who has told him that they're not important, and he's like, what? That's amazing. In 900 years of time and space, I've never met anyone who wasn't important before. So it's, just be confident that you're important, you've got a right to speak up, you've got a right to speak out, follow a few basic guidelines, and to be honest, it's going to be hard for you to go wrong. That's it from me, but happy to hang around and answer any questions.